So a slightly different approach to this, which has been labeled by many as the dominant approach in ethics and political philosophy in the modern era, is called reflective equilibrium. And this is built on the acceptance that intuitions alone cannot justify moral views. John Rawls, who's pictured here, wants to kind of accept that some of our intuitions are perhaps going to be unreliable, or at least can't form the whole basis of our moral theory. And this is something that seems very plausible. And so Rawls suggests that we need to have some kind of middle ground here to find some equilibrium between our moral theories and our intuitions. So Rawls puts this in the language of what he calls considered judgments, but we can think of it in terms of intuitions as well. So reflective equilibrium is trying to find this balancing point between theories and intuitions in such a way that our ethical picture seems to look more consistent and more plausible. So now I'm just going to talk you through 3 steps that Rawls says that we should take while trying to find reflective equilibrium. So the first thing that we should do is ensure that our judgments or our intuitions are considered carefully. And this links to what we were saying in the previous slide, thinking about how we want to kind of maybe prune away some of our less reliable intuitions. So we want to really make sure that our judgments are considered carefully. And so that might be comparing our intuitions against other people's intuitions, really sitting around and thinking whether those intuitions are reliable. Again, this comes back to something that we mentioned in the first lecture, which is a slight ambiguity in what counts as intuitions within philosophy, because some philosophers will understand intuitions as being this kind of brute response, which is unanalyzed and something that is not spent any time on. That's your first instinctive response in the moment. Whereas others might consider intuitions to be something more like Rawls's considered judgments. So it's worth noting this only works if you take a certain view about what intuitions can be. So we're going to ensure that our judgments are considered carefully. We want our considered intuitions, our considered judgments. The second step that we're going to take is to consider general moral principles that can accommodate our set of judgments. So we're trying to find, looking at the judgments that we have, looking at all of our intuitions about particular cases. So if I consider a case like the trolley problem, and I say, in the trolley problem, my intuition is that we should do this. And then we go across all of our different cases, and then we see if we can come up with principles that, however loosely, are going to try and generalize the intuitions that we have across various cases. So some principles that we might have that might capture some of our intuitions could be something like, don't harm people unnecessarily, or try not to cause direct harm, or prioritize saving the greatest number. These are all principles that could potentially unify our judgments. So we're looking for something that's going to accommodate all of our intuitions into some general principles. Now we can set up our reflexive equilibrium because we've got our set of intuitions on the one side and our set of principles on the other side, our set of moral rules. And Rawls suggests that the way to act here is to try and kind of gradually revise both the principles and the judgments so that they try and cohere with one another. So what this means in practice is if it turns out that we have a result in our intuitions that doesn't go with our principle, we have a couple of options. So we could either try and reject the principle and try and find a principle that accommodates the intuitions more effectively, or we could potentially keep the principle and reject the intuition. So this is what Singer was talking about before with the utilitarian argument. So if we have something, it's feasible that in a case of reflective equilibrium, what could happen is if it turns out that the utilitarian theory fits all of our other intuitions very effectively, but doesn't fit our intuition about whether or not we should throw the fat man over the bridge to save the 5 people, then maybe based on reflective equilibrium, if we want to get the most coherence possible between our principles and judgments, what we should do is instead reject that intuition. And we might look to do that based on other reasons. So if we think that, the only reason why we have that intuition is because we, as an evolutionary story, we are very reluctant to give tactile violence to one another, but that doesn't apply to pulling switches, but that doesn't seem like ethically relevant information. So all of this is going to be done with arguments to try and test, are these intuitions viable? Are these principles viable? We're trying to mediate between the two and keep going in this evolving and adjusting process until we eventually reach some stable state where we have a set of principles and a set of intuitions that cohere with one another. And so this is, as I said, seen as the dominant view of how ethics and political philosophy should be done in the 21st century. Um, and so it's something very important to kind of look into and know about. And it's a prospect that seems like plausible for how to try and rescue intuitions and their role in philosophy, because it might not be said that this comes with admitting that perhaps intuitions are not entirely trustworthy, but they definitely have some role to play in philosophy if we accept reflective equilibrium as a good model of how philosophy should be done. Because we need to start with our intuitions. We need to start with our judgments in the first place, because otherwise we can't get off the ground in terms of trying to work out ethical principles and then trying to mediate between the two. So this approach tries to kind of get rid of the worst excesses of our intuitions and thereby make them more trustworthy and more reliable by mediating them against